Chapter 4 Time Traveling. I told some of you last Thursday of the principles of time traveling and showed you the actual thing itself, incomplete in the workshop. Here it is now, a little travel worn, truly, and one of the ivory bars is cracked and a brass rail bent, but the rest is sound enough. I expected to finish it on Friday, but on Friday, when the putting together was nearly done, I found that one of the nickel bars was exactly 1 inch too short, and this I had to get remade, so the thing was not complete until this morning. It was at 10 o'clock today that the first of all time machines began its career. I gave it a lapse tap, tried all the screws again, put one more drop of oil on the quartz rod, and sat myself in the saddle. I suppose a suicide who holds a pistol to his skull feels much the same wonder at what will come next as I felt then. I took the starting lever in one hand and the stopping one in the other, pressed the first, and almost immediately the second it seemed to reel. I felt a nightmare sensation of falling, and, looking around, I saw the laboratory exactly as before. Had anything happened? For a moment I suspected that my intellect had tricked me. Then I noted the clock. A moment before, as it seemed, it had stood at a minute or so past 10. Now it was nearly half past 3. I drew a breath, set my teeth, gripped the starting lever with both hands, and went off in a thud. The laboratory got hazy and went dark. Miss Watchett came in and walked, apparently without seeing me, towards the garden door. I suppose it took her a minute or so to traverse the place, but to me she seemed to shoot across the room like a rocket. I pressed the lever over to its extreme position. The night came like a turning out of a lamp, and in another moment came tomorrow. The laboratory grew faint and hazy, then fainter and even fainter. Tomorrow night it came black, and day again. Night again, day again, faster and faster still. An ebbing murmur filled my ears. A strange, dumb confusedness descended my mind. I am afraid I cannot convey the particular sensation of time traveling. They are excessively unpleasant. There is a feeling exactly like that one was upon a switchback of a helpless, headlong motion. I felt the same horrible anticipation, too, of an immature smash as I put on pace. Night followed, day like the flapping of a black wing. The dim suggestion of the laboratory seemed presently to fall away from me, and I saw the sun hopping swiftly across the sky, leaping in every minute, and every minute marking a day. I suppose the laboratory had been destroyed, and I had come into the open air. I had a dim impression of scaffolding, but I was already going too fast to be conscious of any moving things. The slowest snail that ever crawled dashed by too fast for me. The twinkling succession of darkness and light was excessively painful to the eye. Then, in the intermittent darkness, I saw the moon spinning swiftly through her quarters from new to full, and had a faint glimpse of circling stars. Presently, as I went on, still gaining velocity, and the palpitation of night and day merged into one continuous grayness, the sky took on a wonderful deepness of blue, a splendid luminous color, like that of a clearly twilight. The jerking sun became a streak of fire, a brilliant arc in space, the moon a fainter, fluctuating band, and I could see nothing of stars, save now and then a brighter circle flickering in blue. The landscape was misty and vague. I was still on the hillside upon which this house now stands, and the shoulder rose above me a grey dim. I saw trees growing and changing like puffs of vapor. Now brown, now green, they grew, spread, shivered, and passed away. I saw huge buildings rise up faint and far, and pass like dreams. The whole surface of the earth seemed to change, melting and flowing under my eyes. The little hands upon the dials that registered my speed raced round faster and faster. Presently I noted that the sun belt swayed up and down, from scholastic to scholastics, in a minute or less, and that subsequently my pace was over a year a minute. That and minute by minute the white snow flashed across the world and vanished, and was followed by bright green of spring. The unpleasantness sensations of the start were less poignant now. They merged at last into a kind of hysterical exhilaration. I remarked, indeed, a clumsy swaying of the machine, for which I was unable to account, but my mind was too confused to attend to it. So, with a kind of madness growing upon me, I flung myself into futurality. At first I scarce thought of stopping, scarce thought of anything but these new sensations. But presently a fresh series of impressions grew up in my mind, a certain curiosity, and therewith a certain dread, until at last they took complete possession of me. What strange developments of humanity, that wonderful advances upon our rudimentary civilization, I thought might not appear when I came to look nearly into the dim elusive world that raced and fluctuated before my eyes. I saw great and splendid architecture rising about me, more massive than any buildings of our own time, and yet, as it seemed, built of glimmer and mist. I saw a richer green flow up from the hillside and remain there, without any wintry intermission. Even though the veil of my confusion, the earth seemed very fair, and so my mind came around to the business of stopping. The particular risk lay in the possibility of my finding some substance in a space which I, nor the machine, occupied. So long as I traveled at a high velocity through time would scarcely matter. I was, so to speak, attuned as slipping like a vapor through the intersections of intervening substances. But to come to a stop involving a jamming of myself molecule by molecule into whatever lay in my way meant bringing my atoms into such immediate contact with those of the obstacle that a profound chemical reaction, possibly a far-reaching explosion, would result and blow myself and my apparatus out of all possible dimensions into the unknown. This possibility had occurred to me again and again while I was making the machine, but I had cheerfully accepted it. It was an unavoidable risk. One of the risks a man has got to take. Now the risk was inevitable. I no longer saw it the same cheerful light. The fact is that insensibly the absolute strangeness of everything, the stickily jarring and swaying of the machine, above all, the feeling of prolonged failing, and absolutely upset my nerves. I told myself that I could never stop, and with a gust of petulance I resolved to stop forthwith. Like an impatient fool, I lugged over the lever, and incontinently the thing went reeling over. I was flung headlong into the air. There was a sound of a clap of thunder in my ears. I may have been stunned for a moment. A pitiless hail was hissing around me, and I was sitting on soft turf in front of the overset machine. Everything still seemed gray, but presently I remarked that the confusion of my ears was gone. I looked around me. I was on what seemed to be a little lawn in a garden, surrounded by rhododendron bushes, and I noticed that their maneuver and purple blossoms were drooping in a shower under the beating of hailstones. The rebounding, dancing hail hung in a little cloud over the machine and drove along the ground like smoke. In a moment I was wet to the skin. "Fine hospitality," said I, to a man who has traveled innumerable years to see you. Presently I thought I was a fool I was to get wet. I stood up and looked around me. A colossal figure, carved apparently in some white stone, loomed indistinctly beyond the rhododendrons through the hazy downpour, but all else in the world was invisible. My sensations would be hard to describe. As the columns of hail grew thinner, I saw the white figure more distinctly. It was very large, for a silver birch tree touched its shoulder. It was a white marble, in a shape something like a winged phoenix, but the wings, instead of being carried vertically at sides, were spread so that it seemed to hover. The pedestal, it appeared to me, was of bronze, and was thick and vertiginous. It seemed that the face was towards me. The slightest eyes seemed to watch me. There was a faint shadow of a smile on its lips. It's greatly weather-worn, and that imparted an unpleasant suggestion of disease. I stood looking at it for a little space, half a minute, perhaps half an hour. It seemed to advance and to recede as the hail drove before it denser or thinner. At last I tore my eyes from it for a moment, and saw that the hail curtain had worn threadbare, and that the sky was lightening with a promise of sun. I looked up again at the crouching white shape, and full of temerity of my voyage came suddenly upon me. What might appear when the hazy curtain was altogether withdrawn, and what might not have happened to men? What if cruelty had grown into common passion? What if in this interval the race had lost its manliness and had developed into something inhuman, unsympathetic, and overwhelmingly powerful? I might seem some old-fashioned world savage, only the more dreadful and disgusting of our common likeliness, a foul creature to me uncontinuously slain. Already I saw other vast shapes, huge buildings in intricate parapets and tall columns, with a wooden hillside dimly creeping in upon me through the lessening storm. I was seized with panic fear. I turned frantically to the time machine and strove hard to readjust it. As I did so, the shafts of sunlight smote through the thunderstorm. The grain downpour was swept aside and vanished like trailing garments of a ghost. Above me, in the intense blue of summer sky, some faint brown shreds of cloud whirled into nothingness. The great buildings about me stood out clear and distinct, shining with the wet of thunderstorm, and picking out in white by the unmelted hailstones piled along their courses. I felt naked in the strange world. I felt as perhaps a bird may feel in clear air, knowing the hot wings above and will swoop. My fear grew into frenzy. I took a breathing space, set my teeth, and again grappled fiercely, wrist and knee, with the machine. It gave under my desperate onset and turned over. I struck my chin violently, one hand on the saddle, the other on the lever. I stood panting heavily in attitude to mount again. But with this recovery of prompt regret, my courage recovered. I looked more curiously and less fearfully at this world of remote future. It was a circular opening high up in the wall of the near house. I saw a group of figures clad in rich, soft robes. They had seen me, and their faces were directed towards me. Then I hear voices approaching me, coming through the bushes of the white phoenix, where the heads of soldiers of men running. One of these merged in the pathway leading straight to the little lawn upon which I stood with my machine. He was a slight creature, perhaps 4 feet high, clad in a purple tunic, girdled at the waist with a leather belt, sandals, or buckskins. I could not clearly distinguish which were on his feet. His legs were bare to the knees. His head was bare. Noticing that, I noticed for the first time how warm the air was. He struck me as being a very beautiful and graceful creature, but indiscriminately frail. His flushed face reminded me more beautiful kind of consummation, that heretic beauty of which we used to hear so much. That the sight of him, I suddenly regained confidence. I took my hands from the machine. Chapter 5 In the Golden Age. In another moment, we were standing face to face, I and this fragile thing out of futurity. He came straight up to me and laughed into my eyes. The absence from his bearing of any sign of fear struck me at once. Then he turned to the others who were following him and spoke to them in a strange and very sweet liquid tongue. There were others coming, and presently a little group of perhaps 8 or 10 of these exquisite creatures were about me. One of them addressed me. It came into my head, oddly enough, that my voice was too harsh and deep for them. So I shook my head, pointing to my ears. Shook it again. He came a step forward, hesitated, and then touched my hand. Then I felt other softer little tentacles upon my back and shoulders. They wanted to make sure I was real. There was nothing in this at all alarming. Indeed, there was something in these pretty little people that inspired confidence, a graceful gentleness, a certain childlike ease. And besides, they looked so frail, and I could fancy myself flinging a whole dozen of them like 9-pins. But I made a sudden motion to warn them when I saw their little pink hands feeling at the time machine. Happily, then, when it was not too late, I thought of a danger I had hitherto forgotten. Reaching above the bars of the machine, I unscrewed the little lever that would set it in motion, and put these in my pockets. Then I turned again to see what I could do in the way of communication, and then, looking more clearly into the features, I saw some further particularities in their dress in China type of prettiness. The hair, which was unformerly curly, came to a sharp end at the neck and cheek. There was no faintest suggestion of it on the face, and their ears were singularly minute. Their mouths were small, with bright red, rather thin lips, and the little chins ran to a point. The eyes were large and mild, and this may seem enthusiasm on my part. I fancied even there was a certain lack of interest I might have expected in them, as they made no effort to communicate with me, but they simply stood round me, smiling, speaking in soft and cooing notes to each other. I began the conversation. I pointed the time machine and to myself, then hesitating for a moment how to express time. I pointed to the sun, at once a quaintly pretty little finger and a church of purple and white followed my gesture, and then astonishing me by imitating the sound of thunder. For a moment I was staggered, though the import of his gesture was plain enough. The question had come to my mind abruptly: were these creatures fools? You may hardly understand how it took me. You see, I had always anticipated that people of the year 800 and 2000 odd would be incredibly in front of us in knowledge, art, everything. Then one of them suddenly asked me a question, and showing him to be on the intellectual level of one of these 5-year-old children, asked me, in fact, if I had come from the sun in a thunderstorm. I let loose the judgment I had expected upon their clothes, their frail limbs, their fragile features. A flow of disappointment rushed across my mind. For a moment I felt that I had built a time machine in vain. I nodded, pointing to the sun, and gave them such a vivid remembering of a thunderclap as startled them. They all withdrew a pace or so and bowed. Then came one laughing towards me, carrying a chain of beautiful flowers, altogether new to me, and put it around my neck. The idea was inconceived with mellifluous applause, and presently they were all running to and fro for flowers, laughingly flinging them upon me until I was almost smothered with blossoms. You who have never seen the like can scarcely imagine what delicate, wonderful flowers countless years of culture had created. Then someone suggested that their playing should be exhibited in the nearest building, and so I was led past the Sphinx of white marble, which had seemed to watch me all the while with a smile at my astonishment, towards a vast grey edificate fretted stone. As I went with them, the memory of my confident anticipations of a profoundly grave and intellectual prosperity came, with irreversible merit, to my mind. The building had a huge entry, and was altogether of colossal dimensions. I was naturally most occupied with the growing crowd of little people, and with the big open portals that yawned before me, shadowy and mysterious. My general impression of the world I saw over their heads was a tangled waste of beautiful bushes and flowers, a long neglected yet weedless garden. I saw a number of tall spikes of strange white flowers, measuring a foot perhaps across the spread of the waxen petals. They grew scattered as if wild along the vertical shrubs, but as I say, I did not examine them closely at this time. The time machine was left deserted on the turf among the rhododendrons. The arch of the door was richly carved, but naturally I did not observe the carving yet narrowly, though I fancied I saw suggestions of old Phoenician decorations as I passed through, and it struck me that they were very badly broken and weather-worn. Several more brightly clad people met me in the doorway, and so we entered. I, dressed in dingy 19th century garments, looked rustique enough, garden-land with flowers, and surrounded by an ebbing mass of bright, soft-colored robes and shining white limbs, and a mellifluous whirl of laughter and laughing speech. The big door opened into a particularly great hall hung with brown. The roof was in shadow, and the windows were particularly glazed with colored glass, and partially unglazed, emitted a tempered light. The floor was made of huge blocks of some very hard white metal, not plates nor slabs, blocks, and it seemed so much worn, as I judged by the going to and fro of past generations, as to be deeply channeled along the more frequented ways, traversed to the length where innumerable tables of slabs of polished stone raised, perhaps a foot from the floor. Upon these were heaps of fruit. Some I recognized as a kind of hypertrophied raspberry and orange, but for most part they were strange. Between the tables was scattered a great number of cushions. Upon these my conductors seated themselves, singing for me to do likewise. With a pretty absence of ceremony, they began to eat the fruit with their hands, flinging peel and stalks and so forth into the round openings at the sides of the tables. I was not loath to follow the example, for I felt thirsty and hungry, so I surveyed the hall at my leisure, and perhaps the thing that struck me most was its dilapidated look. The stained glass windows, which displayed only a geometrical pattern, were broken in many places, and the curtains that hung across the lower end were thick with dust, and it caught my eye that the corner of the marble table near me was fractured. Nevertheless, the general effect was extremely rich and picturesque. There was perhaps a couple hundred of people dining at table, most of them seated as near to me as they possibly could come. They were watching me in interest, their little eyes shining over the fruit they were eating. All were clad in the same soft yet strong silky material. Fruit, by the by, which is all their diet. These people were strict vegetarians, and while I was with them, in spite of some carnal cravings, I had to be vigorous also. Indeed, I found afterwards that horses, cattle, sheep, dogs that fall the Ischorians into extinction. But the fruits were very delightful. One, in particular, that seemed to be in season all the time I was there, a flowery thing in a three-sided husk, was especially good, and I made it my staple. At first I was puzzled by all these strange fruits, and by the strange flowers I saw, but later I began to receive their report. However, I am telling you of my fruit dinner in distinct future now. So, soon my appetite was a little checked. I determined to make a resolute attempt to learn the speech of these new men of mine. Clearly, that was the next thing to do. The fruits seemed a convenient thing to begin upon. Holding one of these up, I began a series of interrogative sounds and gestures. I had some considerable difficulty of conveying my meaning. At first, my efforts met in the stare of surprise and inextinguishable laughter, but presently a fair-haired little creature seemed to grasp my intention and repeated a name. They had to chatter and explain the business at great length to each other, and my first attempts to make the exquisite little sounds of their language caused an immense amount of genuine, if uncivil, amusement. However, I felt like a schoolmaster amidst children, and persisted, and presently I had a score of noun substantives at least at my command, and then I got to demonstrative pronouns, and even the verb to eat, but it was slow work, and the little people soon tired and wanted to get away from my interrogations, so I determined rather of necessity to let them give their lessons in little doses, when they felt inclined, and very little doses I found they were before long, for I never met people more indolent or so easily fatigued. Chapter 6. The Sunset of Mankind. A queer thing I soon discovered about my little hosts, and that their lack of interest. They would come to me with eager cries of astonishment like children, but, like children, they would soon stop examining me and wander away after some other toy. The dinner and my conversational beginnings ended. I noted for the first time that almost all those who had surrounded me at first were gone. It is odd, too, how speedily I came to discard these little people. I went out through the portal into the sunlit world again. As soon as my hunger was satisfied, I was continually meeting more of these little men of the future, who would follow me a little more distant, chatter and laugh about me, and having smiled and gesticulated in my friendly way, leading me again to my own devices. The calm of the evening was about the world as I emerged from the great hall. The scene was lit by a warm glow of the setting sun. At first, things were very confusing. Everything was so entirely different from the world I had known. Even the flowers. The big building I had left was situated on the slope of a broader river valley, but the Thames had shifted perhaps a mile from its present position. I resolved to mount to the summit of a crest, perhaps a mile and a half away, from which I could get a wider view of our planet in the year 802,701 AD. For that, I should explain, was the day of the little dials of my machine recorded. As I walked, I was watching for every impression that I could possibly help to examine. The condition of ruinous splendor in which I found the world, for ruinous it was. A little way up the hill, for instance, was a great heap of granite, bound together by masses of aluminum, a vast labyrinth of precipitous walls and crumbled heaps. Amidst were very thick heaps of very beautiful pagora-like plants, nettles possibly, but wonderfully tinted with brown about the leaves, and incapable of stinging. It was evidently the direct remains of some vast structure. To what end Bill I could not determine. It was here that I was destined at a later date to have a very strange experience. The first invitation of a still stranger discovery, but that I will speak in its proper place. Looking around with a sudden thought from a terrace on which I rested for a while, I realized that there was no small houses to be seen. Apparently, the single house, and possibly even the household, had vanished. Here, There among the greenery were palace-like buildings, but the house and the cottage, which from such characteristic features of our English landscape had disappeared. Communism, I said to myself, and on the heels of that came another thought. I looked at the half a dozen little figures that were following me. Then, in a flash, I perceived that all had the same form of costume, the same soft hairless visage, and the same girlish rowdy of limb. It may seem strange, perhaps, that I had not noticed this before, but everything was so strange. Now I saw the fact plainly enough, in costume, and in all the differences of texture and bearing, and that now marked off the sexes from each other. These people of the future were alike, and the children seemed to my eyes to be miniatures of their parents. I judged then that the children of the time were extremely precocious, physically at least. I found afterwards abundant verification of my opinion. Seeing the ease and security in which the people were living, I lived that this close resemblance of the sexes was, after all, what one would expect. For the strength of a man and the softness of a woman, the institution of the family, indifference of occupations were militant necessities of the age of physical force, where population is balanced and abundant. But childbearing becomes an evil rather than a blessing to the state, where violence becomes but rarely, and offspring are secure. There is less necessity, indeed, there is no necessity for an efficient family, and the socialization of the sexes, which reference to their child's needs disappears. We see some beginnings of this event in our own time, and in this future age it is complete. This, I must remind you, was my speculation at the time. Later, I was to appreciate how far it fell short of the reality. While I was musing upon these things, my attention was attracted to a pretty little structure, like a well under a cupola. I thought it a transitory way of the oddness of wells still existing, and then resumed the thread of my speculations. There was no large buildings towards the top of the hill, and as my walking powers were evidently miraculous, I was presently left alone for the first time. With a strange sense of freedom and adventure, I pushed up to the crest. There I found a seat of some yellow metal I did not recognize, corroded in places with a kind of pinkish rust, half smothered in soft moss. The armrests cast and failed in the resemblance of griffins' heads. I sat down on it, and I surveyed the broad view in our old world under the sunset of that long day. It was as sweet and fair a view as I'd ever seen. The sun had already gone down below the horizon, and the west was flaming gold, touched with some horizontal bars of purple and crimson. Below was a valley of Thames, in which the river lay like a band of burnished steel. I have already spoke of the great places dotted about among the Ferragine greenery, some in ruins and some still occupied. Here and there rose a white or silver figure in the waste garden of the earth. Here and there came the sharp vertical line of some cupola or obelisk. There was no hedges, no signs of proprietary rights, no evidence of horticulture. The whole earth had become a garden. So, watching, I began to put my interpretations upon the things I had seen. And as it shaped itself to me that evening, my interpretation was something in this way. It seemed to me that I'd happened upon humanity upon the wane. The rudimentary sunset me thinking of the sunset of mankind. For the first time, I began to realize the odd sequence of social effort in which we are at the present engaged, and yet, come to think, it was a logical consequence enough. Strength is the outcome of need. Security sets a premium on feebleness. The work of elaboration and conditions of life, the true civilizing process that makes life more and more secure, had gone steadily on to a climax. One triumphant of a united humanity over nature had followed another. Things that are now mere dreams have become projects deliberately put in hand and carried forward, and the harvest was what I saw. After all, the sanitation and the horticulture of today are still in rudimentary stage. The science of our time is intact, but little department of the field of human disease. But even so, it spreads its operations very steadily and persistently. Our agriculture and horticulture destroyed a weed just here and there and cultivate perhaps a score or so of wholesome plants, leaving the greater number to fight out the balance as they can. We improve our favorite plants and animals, and how few they are, gradually by selective breeding, now a new and better peach, now a seedless grape, now a sweeter and larger flower, now a more convenient breed of cattle. We improve them gradually, because our ideas are vague and tentative, and our knowledge is very limited, because nature, too, is shy and slow and clumsy in our hands. Someday, all this will be better organized, and still better. That is, the drift of the current in spite of eddies. The whole world will be intelligent, educated, and cooperating. Things will move faster and faster towards the subjection of nature. In the end, wisely and carefully, we shall readjust the balance of animal and vegetation life to suit our human needs. This adjustment, I say, must have been done, and done well, done indeed for all time, in the space of time across which my machine had left. The air is free from gnats, the earth from weeds or fungi. Everything here, fruits and sweet and delightful flowers, brilliant butterflies flew hither and thither. The idea of prospective medicine was attained. Diseases had been stamped out. I saw no evidence of any contagious disease during all my stay, and I have to tell you later that even the process of putrefaction and decay had been profoundly affected by these changes. Social triumphs, too, had been effected. I saw mankind housed in splendid shelters, gloriously clothed, and as yet I found them engaged in no toil. There were no signs of struggle, neither social nor economical struggle. The shop, the advertisement, traffic, all the commerce which consists the body of our world was gone. It was nature on that golden evening that I should jump at the idea of social paradise. The difficulty of increasing population had been met, I guess, and the population had ceased to increase. But with this change in condition comes inevitability adaptations to the change. What, unless biological science is a mass of errors, is the cause of human intelligence and vigor? Hardship and freedom, conditions under which the active, strong, and suitable survive, and the weaker go to the wall. Conditions that put a premium upon the loyal allegiance of capable men, upon self-restraint, patience, and decision, and the institution of the family, and the emotions that arise therein. The fierce jealousy, the tenderness of offspring, parental devotion, all found their justification and support in the intermediate dangers of the young. Now, where are these immediate dangers? There is a sentimental arising, and it will grow against communal jealousy, against fierce maturity, against passion of all sorts, unnecessary things now, and things that make us uncomfortable, savage survivors, discords in a refined and pleasant life. I thought of all the physical slightness of the people, their lack of intelligence, and those big abundant ruins, and it strengthened my belief in perfect conquest of nature. For after the battle comes quiet, Humanity had been strong, energetic, and intelligent, and had used all its abundant vitality to alter the conditions under which it lived. And now came the reaction of the altered conditions. Under new conditions of perfect comfort and security, that relentless energy that with us is strength will become weakness. Even in our own time, certain tendencies and desires, once necessary to survival, are a constant source of failure. Physical courage and the love of battle, for instance, are no great help, may even be a hindrance to a civilized man. In a state of physical balance, security, power, intellectual as well as physical, would be out of place. For countless years, I judged there would be no danger of war or solitary violence, no danger from wild beasts, no wasting disease to require strength of constitution, no need of toil. For such a life, what we should call the weak are as well equipped as the strong, are indeed no longer weak. Better equipped indeed they are, for the strong would be fretted by the energy for which there would be no outlet. Note about the exquisite beauty of Billings I saw was the outcome of the last surgings of now purposeless energy of mankind, before it settled down into perfect harmony with the conditions under which it lived. The flourish of that triumphant which began the last great peace. This has ever been the fate of energy in security. It takes to art, to eroticism, and then to languor and decay. Even this artistic impetus would at last die away, and almost die in the time I saw, to adorn themselves with flowers, to dance, to sing in the sunlight. So much was left of the artistic spirit, and no more. Even that would fade in the end to a content inactivity. We are kept keen on the grindstone of pain and necessity, and it would seem to me that here was the hateful grindstone broken at last. As I stood there in the gathering dark, I thought that in a simple explanation I had mastered the problem of the world, mastered the whole secret of these delicious people, possibly the checks they had received for increase of population and succeeded too well, and their numbers had rather diminished than kept stationary. That would account for the abandoned ruins. Every simple was my explanation, and plausible enough as almost wrong theories are.